November 2017, Auckland Prison. What you're about to hear happened behind concrete walls and steel bars. A Mongrel Mob member was going about his daily routine when 5 Black Power inmates surrounded him. In the next few minutes, he would be stabbed 33 times with a 14-centimeter homemade weapon. The attack was so brutal that emergency surgery was needed to save his life. The wounds covered his face, neck, head, back, and sides. This is the story of Damian Weretta, the man who led that attack and changed Auckland's prison system forever. Today, we examine how gang warfare doesn't end at the prison gates. It gets worse. Before we go further into this story, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Are you familiar with New Zealand's gang culture? Drop your location in the comments below. I read every single one, and it's always fascinating to see our global audience. To understand what happened in that Auckland prison cell, you need to know about Black Power. This isn't just another gang. It's one of New Zealand's most established criminal organizations. Black Power formed in the 1970s and quickly became dominant across Auckland streets. The gang draws most of its members from Maori and Pacific Island communities, often recruiting young men who feel disconnected from society. Their territory stretches across South Auckland, with chapters operating like small armies. Each chapter has its own president, its own rules, and its own enemies. One man who knows this world better than most is Phil Paikea. He was a founding member and president of the Black Power chapter in Whangarei. For years, Paikea lived the gang life, drug dealing, violence, and constant conflict with rival gangs. But Paikea's story took an unexpected turn. After a prison stint and pressure from his wife Rowena, he walked away from gang life completely. Today, he runs community programs helping others escape the same cycle of violence he once lived. For over 30 years, Paikea has worked to break young people free from gangs. He co-founded Safe Man, Safe Family, and has helped hundreds of foster children. The man who once led violent gang wars now counsels families and officiates weddings. But not all Black Power members found redemption like Paikea. Damian Weretta chose a different path entirely. While Paikea was building community centers, Weretta was climbing the ranks within Black Power through violence and fear. Within the gang, Weretta earned a reputation as an enforcer, the kind of member other gangs feared and even his own associates respected from a distance. His job was simple: handle problems that couldn't be solved with words. Court records show a pattern that started early and never stopped. Assault charges, violence against other inmates during previous prison sentences, each incident more brutal than the last. Prison officials knew Weretta well. Every time he was incarcerated, fights seemed to follow. He had a particular hatred for rival gang members, especially those wearing Mongrel Mob colors. During one earlier prison sentence, Weretta attacked an inmate simply because he suspected gang affiliations. During another, he was caught planning coordinated assaults against multiple targets. Prison staff tried different approaches: solitary confinement, restricted movements, even attempting to keep rival gang members in separate blocks. Nothing seemed to contain Weretta's capacity for violence. By November 2017, corrections officers knew they had a problem. Weretta was back in Auckland Prison, and this time, he wasn't alone. 4 other inmates were following his lead, waiting for his signal. What none of them realized was that Weretta's reputation was about to become legend. To understand the hatred that drove what happened next, you need to know about New Zealand's most violent gang rivalry: Black Power versus Mongrel Mob, a conflict that has lasted decades and claimed countless lives. The rivalry goes beyond territory or drum profits. It's about respect, pride, and most importantly, colors. Black Power members wear black. Mongrel Mob members wear red. These aren't just fashion choices. They're declarations of war. The color rules are deadly serious. Wearing the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood can get you beaten, stabbed, or killed. It sounds ridiculous to outsiders, but to gang members, colors represent everything they stand for: In September, just months before our prison attack, this color obsession played out in horrific detail at a McDonald's restaurant in Hawera. A partially disabled man walked in wearing a red jersey. Not because he was in Mongrel Mob, but because he liked the color red. 13 Black Power members saw that red jersey and decided it was an insult. They surrounded him, stabbed him, and beat him nearly to death. The attack was led by a man named Maori, who was 29 years old and armed with a knife. The victim spent weeks in hospital. His crime? Wearing red to buy a hamburger. This is the mindset that follows gang members everywhere, including into prison. Behind bars, the rivalry doesn't stop. It gets concentrated. Rival gang members are locked in the same building, sharing the same spaces, eating in the same cafeteria. Prison officials try to separate gangs, but it's impossible to keep them completely apart. Eventually, Black Power meets Mongrel Mob face to face. When that happens, violence usually follows. In November 2017, that face-to-face meeting was about to turn deadly. Auckland Prison in 2017 was overcrowded, understaffed, and dangerous. More than 900 inmates were packed into a facility designed for fewer people. Gang members made up a significant portion of the population. Prison officials knew the risks. They tried to keep Black Power and Mongrel Mob members separated. Different cell blocks, different meal times, different recreation periods. But in an overcrowded prison, complete separation was impossible. The tension was constant. Every day brought new confrontations. A look across the cafeteria, a comment in the exercise yard. Gang members would find ways to communicate threats, plan attacks, and settle old scores. Making weapons inside prison requires creativity and patience. Inmates take ordinary objects and turn them into deadly tools. A piece of metal from a broken bed frame, a sharpened piece of plastic, even a toothbrush can become a weapon with enough time and determination. The weapon that would soon change everything was a 14-centimeter shank, roughly the length of a pencil, but sharpened to a deadly point. Prison searches happen regularly, but determined inmates always find ways to hide contraband. This particular weapon was made from materials easily found within the prison. It took time to create, which means the attack wasn't spontaneous. Someone planned this. Someone prepared for violence. Security cameras monitored common areas, but they couldn't watch everywhere. Guards patrolled regularly, but they couldn't be in every corner at every moment. Cell searches happened frequently, but inmates had learned to hide things well. By November 2017, all the ingredients were in place. Overcrowding, gang rivalry, available weapons, and limited supervision. The prison system had multiple security measures designed to prevent exactly what was about to happen. November 2017 would test every single one of those measures. The day before the attack started like any other in Auckland Prison. Wake-up calls at 6 in the morning. Breakfast in the cafeteria. Work assignments for those who had them. Recreation time in the yard. But beneath the routine, something was building. Damian Weretta had been planning. The 14-centimeter shank was ready. 4 other Black Power inmates were prepared to follow his lead. These weren't random associates. Each man had his own history of violence, his own reasons for hating Mongrel Mob members. Together they formed a group that prison officials would later describe as highly dangerous and coordinated. The target had been identified. A Mongrel Mob member who represented everything they despised. His presence in their section of the prison was seen as an insult that demanded response. Throughout that day, the 5 men communicated in ways that avoided detection. Prison inmates developed their own language, their own signals. A look across the meal table, a gesture during yard time, words spoken in code during casual conversation. Guards noticed nothing unusual. The men followed normal routines, attended required activities, returned to their cells without incident. To outside observers, it was just another ordinary day in prison life. But weapons don't sharpen themselves. Plans don't make themselves. while most inmates were focused on surviving another day behind bars. These 5 men were preparing for violence. The 14-centimeter shank was moved to its final location. Roles were assigned. The attack strategy was confirmed. Each man knew exactly what he was expected to do when the moment came. As evening approached and lights went out across the prison blocks, most inmates settled in for another night. They had no idea that 5 men were lying awake, waiting for tomorrow. By morning, everything would change. The attack began during what should have been a normal morning period. The Mongrel Mob victim was moving through a common area when 5 Black Power inmates surrounded him. There was no warning, no argument beforehand, no chance to run or defend himself. One moment he was walking normally, the next moment he was fighting for his life. Damian Weretta led the assault. He pulled out the 14-centimeter shank and immediately began stabbing. The other 4 inmates held the victim in place, ensuring he couldn't escape or call for help. The first stab wound went into his face, then his neck, then his head. Weretta wasn't stabbing randomly. He was targeting the most vulnerable areas of the human body, places where wounds could prove fatal within minutes. The victim tried to protect himself, raising his hands to block the weapon. The blade cut through his fingers and palms before continuing toward his head and neck. Blood covered the floor within seconds. Other inmates in the area backed away. Some shouted for guards. Others simply watched in horror as the attack continued. Weretta moved the blade to the victim's back and sides, adding wound after wound. The count would later reach 33 separate stab wounds. 33 times the shank penetrated skin, muscle, and vital organs. The entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes changed multiple lives forever. Prison alarms began sounding as guards rushed toward the scene. The 5 attackers didn't try to run. They stood over their victim, who was now unconscious and bleeding heavily from dozens of wounds. Emergency medical teams were called immediately. Paramedics worked to stabilize the victim while he was still on the prison floor. The blood loss was severe. His breathing was weak. His pulse was dropping rapidly. Within minutes, he was rushed to Auckland Hospital's trauma unit. Doctors later said that without immediate emergency surgery, he would have died from his injuries. Back in the prison, 5 men were placed in solitary confinement, while investigators documented one of the most brutal attacks in New Zealand prison history. At Auckland Hospital, trauma surgeons were fighting to save a life. The victim arrived with 33 stab wounds covering his face, neck, head, back, and sides. Several wounds had penetrated vital organs. Others had damaged major blood vessels. The medical team worked for hours. They repaired damaged arteries, closed punctured organs, and stitched dozens of wounds. The victim required multiple blood transfusions as surgeons tried to replace what he had lost on the prison floor. Back at the prison, the full scope of Weretta's leadership became clear. Witnesses reported that during the attack, he had actively encouraged the other 4 inmates to take turns with the weapon. He handed the shank to different attackers, directing them where to strike. Even more disturbing were the taunts. As the victim lay bleeding, Weretta shouted Black Power slogans at both the injured man and the responding prison staff. He treated the near-fatal attack like a victory celebration. The prison went into immediate lockdown. All inmates were confined to their cells while investigators secured the crime scene. The common area where the attack occurred was sealed off as forensic teams documented blood patterns and collected evidence. Prison staff knew they were dealing with something unprecedented. The coordination, the weapon preparation, the deliberate targeting of vital areas. This wasn't a spontaneous fight between inmates. This was an attempted murder carried out with military precision. Medical reports from the hospital painted a grim picture. The victim's injuries were so severe that doctors initially weren't sure he would survive the first night. His face required reconstructive surgery. His neck wounds had barely missed major arteries. A few centimeters difference and he would have died within minutes. For days, he remained in intensive care. His family was told to prepare for the worst. Brain scans showed potential damage from blood loss. His body was fighting infections from multiple open wounds. Prison officials realized they had failed in their most basic responsibility, keeping inmates safe. Despite all their security measures, 5 men had obtained a deadly weapon, planned a coordinated attack, and nearly killed another human being in their custody. The victim would eventually recover, but his life was forever changed. The physical scars were permanent. The psychological trauma would last even longer. The investigation began immediately. Prison security cameras had captured most of the attack from multiple angles. The footage was clear, detailed, and damning. The video showed exactly what happened: 5 inmates surrounding one victim, Weretta pulling out the weapon, the coordinated nature of the assault. There was no question about who did what. The cameras had recorded everything. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses. Other inmates had seen the attack unfold. Prison guards had witnessed the aftermath. Medical staff documented every injury in precise detail. The weapon itself became key evidence. The 14-centimeter shank was recovered, with blood evidence linking it directly to the victim. Forensic analysis showed how it had been crafted from prison materials over time. Medical reports provided crucial testimony. Doctors explained each of the 33 wounds, their depth, their location, their potential to cause death. The reports made clear that this was attempted murder, not just assault. Cell searches revealed additional evidence. Investigators found materials used to create the weapon. They discovered communications between the 5 attackers, showing premeditation. The attack hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned in advance. Prison records showed Weretta's history of violence and his leadership role among Black Power inmates. His previous assaults demonstrated a pattern of escalating brutality that culminated in this attack. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, witness testimony, medical documentation, physical evidence, and a clear motive based on gang rivalry. Prosecutors knew they had a strong case for attempted murder charges, but the investigation revealed something even more concerning. This attack represented a new level of coordinated gang violence within the prison system. 5 inmates working together with military precision suggested that gang organization behind bars was more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Prison officials faced difficult questions. How had 5 inmates obtained weapon materials? How had they planned the attack without detection? How had they coordinated their movements to avoid security measures? The answers pointed to systemic failures in prison security and gang management. Changes would be necessary to prevent similar attacks in the future. When the case reached court, the evidence was presented in devastating detail. The judge watched security footage of the attack. Medical experts explained each of the 33 wounds. Witnesses described Weretta's leadership role and his encouragement of the other attackers. The prosecution argued that this wasn't just attempted murder. It was an act of terrorism designed to intimidate rival gang members and assert Black Power dominance within the prison system. Weretta showed no remorse during proceedings. He maintained his gang loyalty and refused to apologize for the attack. His attitude convinced the judge that he remained a serious threat to public safety. The sentence was unprecedented. Weretta received preventive detention, meaning he would remain in prison indefinitely until authorities determined he was safe to release. This wasn't a fixed sentence like 10 or 20 years. This was potentially life imprisonment. Preventive detention is reserved for New Zealand's most dangerous offenders. It means the person poses such a high risk of reoffending that they cannot be safely released into the community. Only a handful of criminals receive this sentence each year. For Weretta, it meant his gang life had finally caught up with him. The pattern of violence that started years earlier had escalated to a point where society would no longer tolerate his presence outside prison walls. The attack also triggered major changes in prison security protocols. Gang members were separated more strictly. Weapon searches became more frequent and thorough. Common areas received additional surveillance. Cell movements were monitored more closely. Meanwhile, the victim faced a long road to recovery. Physical therapy helped restore movement to damaged muscles. Reconstructive surgery improved his appearance, but the psychological trauma proved harder to heal. He suffered nightmares about the attack. He developed anxiety around groups of people. Simple activities like walking through public spaces became sources of fear. The 33 stab wounds had healed, but the emotional scars remained. The contrast with Phil Paikea's story couldn't be more stark. Both men started in Black Power. Both experienced the violence and criminal lifestyle of gang culture, but their paths diverged completely. Paikea chose redemption, transformation, and community service. He walked away from violence and spent decades helping others do the same. Today, he's respected as a community leader who proves change is possible. Weretta chose escalation, brutality, and gang loyalty. He embraced violence as a way of life and refused every opportunity to change direction. Today, he remains locked away indefinitely. His life defined by 33 stab wounds he inflicted on another human being. This attack represents something larger than one violent incident. It shows how gang culture creates cycles of violence that are incredibly difficult to break. Young people join gangs seeking belonging and protection, but often find only brutality and imprisonment. New Zealand's prison system faces enormous challenges managing gang violence. Despite security measures, gang loyalty often trumps personal safety. Members like Weretta see prison time as temporary. Their real identity remains tied to their gang affiliation. The story becomes even more tragic when you consider other cases. Christopher Shadrock, the Killer Bees member who murdered Joanne Wang, also died behind bars, not from gang violence, but from suicide after taking illicit drugs. His life, like Weretta's, was consumed by gang culture until there was nothing left. Statistics paint a grim picture of gang violence in Auckland. Hundreds of serious assaults each year can be traced to gang conflicts. Hospital emergency rooms regularly treat victims of gang-related stabbings, shootings, and beatings. But Phil Paikea's transformation proves that change is possible. After decades in gang leadership, he chose to walk away and rebuild his life around helping others. His work with Safe Man, Safe Family has prevented countless acts of violence by addressing the root causes that drive people toward gangs. The difference between Paikea and Weretta isn't just personal choice. It's about timing, support systems, and opportunities for change. Paikea had a wife who confronted him. He had a wake-up call in prison that made him reevaluate his priorities. He had community programs that offered alternatives to gang life. Weretta had none of these advantages. His gang identity became so central to his sense of self that he couldn't imagine any other way of living. When faced with opportunities to change, he chose violence instead. Prison systems around the world struggle with this same challenge. How do you rehabilitate someone who sees violence as their primary source of identity and belonging? How do you break cycles of gang loyalty that often span generations?